There's lots of myths and misconceptions about this thing. Probably the most controversial one is that it means sacrificing returns. The evidence is pretty mixed on this one. There is no evidence that an ESG filtered fund is sustainably better or sustainably worse. It is definitely different. And when you look at the broader returns, you generally see that ESG does well when resources do badly and vice versa. ESG funds looked really good because of the dominance of the Facebooks and Googles. Maybe low carbon, but question their ethical stances. Until Russia invaded Ukraine, gas prices went up and suddenly resources started to look better. So no particular evidence that it's sustainably better or sustainably worse. It will be different. And that's either different good or different bad, depending on the period you choose. Logically, you would say that if you're trying to optimize a whole wide range of options, that a constrained optimal cannot be better than an unconstrained optimal. But there's no evidence it's going to be better or worse. What we do know is that companies that score high in ESG ratings tend to be larger and more profitable. Now, I suspect that that's largely correlation rather than causation, because big profitable companies have the resources to fill out the forms for all of the ESG ratings agencies. The other thing that's fairly common is it's all about the environment. I mean, certainly in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that's really what people meant when they talked about sustainable investing. And it was largely about not investing in fossil fuels. As we've just seen, it's about a lot more than that. And the other misconception is that it's expensive. That was certainly true, or you need a large portfolio. This was certainly true a decade or so ago. An ESG fund was an expensive option a decade ago. And now we're seeing lots of lower cost rules-based system funds, which are now a bit more affordable. But it is a little bit more expensive. There's no doubt about that. And then I guess finally, you've got to accept that there is no perfect answer. So when you start looking at, let's just take fossil fuels as a good example, it's fairly easy to say, well, I'm not going to invest in oil and gas explorers and producers. But what about pipelines? What about utilities who distribute that to households?
What about shipping?
Or shipping, or companies that use those products to create fertilizer or plastics? What about roads? Transurban, for example, one of the biggest infrastructure stocks in Australia, UniSuper just got caned or taken to court by the Environmental Defender's Office for including Transurban in their green sustainable fund. So, obviously every car that drives down a Transurban toll road is spewing out emissions, and those emissions could be reduced if people caught the train. And then, do you include airports, travel agents? Travel is 8% of global emissions. So are they in or out? Really complex set of analysis there. Simple, no fossil fuels. That's an easy concept, but turning that into practice is harder. What about banks who lend to them? So if you look at FAIR, for example, FAIR, which is Beta Shares, Australian large company sustainable fund, it doesn't have any of the big four banks. It doesn't have Transurban, but it does have Webjet and what's the other travel company, Phil?
Corporate Travel.
Corporate Travel, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's got both of those in it. So where do you personally want to draw the line? That makes this an exercise. ESG rating. So where are you going to get information to do this? So I mentioned earlier about Tesla. Tesla scores really well on some measures because it's obviously helping the decarbonisation of our car fleet, but appalling governance and poor labour relations. Apple scores really well on carbon footprint, but labour practices, your iPhone's made in China. And then, of course, there's the risk of greenwashing. Or I listened to a professor at Cambridge. His name escapes me at the moment. He's a climate change professor of climate change at Oxford or Cambridge. And he talked about the concept of brown scraping. We talk about greenwashing, which is pretending it's green when it isn't really. And Van Gogh just got fined a truckload of money for this. Brown scraping is the concept of, it comes from scraping the plates. You empty all your plates and you put them all on one plate. So BHP, for example, but recently exited the oil and gas business. So it sold its assets to Woodside. It exited much of the thermal coal by selling it to Whitehaven. Is that right, Phil? Whitehaven?
Mm-hmm.
So neither of those transactions changed the number of barrels of oil or petajoules of gas produced or burned. None of them changed an ounce of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere. But those two transactions now makes BHP a clean investment. And so that's why someone like Aware Super Fund in their sustainable green fund got 13% allocated to BHP.
However, I might point out that BHP is one of the largest copper producers in the world as well.
Yeah.
And for a renewable energy future, we're going to need a lot of copper.